Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to break down the latest in research, making it quick and easy to grasp.
That's the plan.
Today, we're looking at a really interesting paper, Contextual Similarity Distillation, Ensemble Uncertainties with a Single Model.
Yeah, this one caught my eye too. It tackles a pretty fundamental problem in ML.
Right. So if you're keen on understanding how we figure out if a machine learning model is, confident in its predictions, this is for you.
Definitely. Knowing when a model is unsure is honestly just as important as getting the right answer, sometimes more so.
Absolutely. And this paper introduces a method they call CSD, Contextual Similarity Distillation.
Mm-hmm.
And the big idea, the key insight really, is that CSD lets you get the kind of uncertainty estimate you'd normally need a whole bunch of models for an ensemble.
Right, the standard approach.
But it does it with just one model, and remarkably, in just one forward pass.
Which is huge, computationally speaking. That jump in efficiency could really change things.
So why is this important? I mean, uncertainty quantification shows up everywhere, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think about reinforcement learning. You need uncertainty for efficient exploration, finding new strategies.
Or making offline RL more stable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in general, deep learning, things like detecting outliers, knowing when the model sees something totally unexpected, crucial stuff.
But the traditional ways, like you said, ensembles or full Bayesian methods, they're just so computationally heavy.
Massively. Training multiple big networks or dealing with complex Bayesian approximations, it's often just not practical.
Which really sets the stage for why this CSD paper is potentially so significant. It offers a way around that bottleneck.
Precisely. So our mission today is to unpack CSD. What's the core idea? How does it connect to theory? And what are the practical takeaways?
Let's dive in. So just to recap the core contribution.
Go for it.
CSD, single model estimates ensemble-level uncertainty, avoids the cost of training and running multiple models.
And it's not just pulled out of thin air. It's motivated by some pretty deep theory about how wide neural networks learn.
The neural tangent kernel, the NTK you mentioned.
That's the one. The NTK framework suggests that these wide networks have predictable learning dynamics. CSD kind of leverages that predictability.
Okay, interesting. How does it leverage it?
Well, it reframes the whole problem. Instead of directly trying to calculate ensemble variance, it turns it into a supervised regression task.
A regression task. What's it predicting?
It predicts something called kernel similarities. Think of it as the model learning how similar data points look from the perspective of this underlying kernel theory.
So it learns these similarities,
which act as the targets for the regression.
And from that, it can estimate the ensemble variance.
Exactly. It's a clever workaround. The payoff being efficient uncertainty at inference time, single forward pass.
And another point they make, which seems quite powerful, is using unlabeled data.
Yeah, or even just data augmentations. You can feed these into the CSD process to actually improve the uncertainty estimates, especially for, say, a target domain where you don't have labels.
Which is great because unlabeled data is usually much easier to come by.
For sure. It taps into that whole semi-supervised, self-supervised trend.
And they tested this. Does it hold up?
They did. They ran experiments on out-of-distribution detection, basically, spotting data the model wasn't trained on.
Oh, detection, yeah, always important.
And also in reinforcement learning. So typically, sparse reward RL, which is notoriously difficult.
And the results?
Pretty compelling. They found CSD performed competitively, sometimes even better than the ensemble baselines, especially considering it's just one model.
Wow, okay. That's impressive. One model matching or beating a whole team of models.
Yeah, particularly in the RL exploration tasks, it showed real promise.
Okay, maybe we should dig a bit deeper into how it works. The methodology, you mentioned the NTK.
Right. So the starting point is theoretical.
Right.
If you knew your test point in advance, the NTK Gaussian process theory tells you how to get the ensemble variance.
But there's always a but.
But it involves inverting this massive matrix, the Graham matrix, which captures all the pairwise similarities between training points. Computationally, that's often a non-starter for big data sets.
Okay, so that's the wall they need to get around.
Exactly. And the core insight for CSD, for a single known query point X, is that you can train a single model, let's call it GST, to basically predict the tricky part of the variance calculation.
Predict what exactly?
It learns to predict the NTK similarity between the training points and this specific test point X. And the paper shows, using an equation, essentially variance, prior kernel term, learned regression term, that the output of this trained model, GX, directly gives you what you need to calculate the variance at x without that big matrix inversion.
Okay, so it learns a function tailored to one specific test point to estimate variance there.
Right. Think of figure 1 in the paper. It kind of shows this geometrically. The difference between this prior kernel value and what the regression function learns is the ensemble variance at that point.
Clever. But obviously we don't usually know the test point in advance. We need it to work for any point.
Exactly. That's the limitation of the first step. So they generalize it. This is where the contextual part of CSD comes in.
Okay. The context.
They introduce a context variable. Let's call it C. The model, now G, takes the input X and this context C, and it's trained to predict the kernel similarity between X and C.
So the context C tells the model which similarity it should be predicting.
Precisely. You train this model on a bunch of input context pairs,
Yeah.
XLCI. By seeing lots of different contexts, the model learns to generalize.
And how does that help with an arbitrary new test point, say X new?
At inference time, you just set the context to be the input itself. You feed X new as both the input and the context into the trained model G. So you compute G, X new, theta.
And that gives you the estimated variance for X new.
It gives you the component needed to estimate the variance for X new, yes. It's an approximation, naturally, because it's interpolating from the context it saw during training.
But a potentially very useful approximation.
Right. And this is where the unlabeled data comes in handy. You can use unlabeled data from your target domain or data augmentations as the context at C during training.
I see. So using relevant contexts helps the model learn better variance estimates for the kind of data it will actually encounter.
Exactly. It refines the uncertainty estimate for that specific domain.
Okay. How do they actually build this G model in practice with neural networks?
Yeah, they use a standard deep learning setup. They parameterize G, X, C, theta, typically as an inner product.
An inner product. Between what?
Between feature vectors extracted from the input X and feature vectors extracted from the context C. So you have two encoder networks, phi for the input and C psi for the context.
Got it. Phi and p psi c.
Right, and output G is roughly phi X dot p a c.
And they also need the kernel prior term, theta x xxe. They approximate this efficiently using gradients.
Gradients, how so?
They use gradients with respect to the last layer weights of the network. It's a known technique to approximate the NTK without computing the full thing. It makes it practical.
Okay, so they have the model structure G and the approximated kernel target theta, then they just train. Yep. Minimize the squared error between the model's output G, E, C, theta, and the target similarity theta IC over the training data and chosen context C.
And for C, the context, they often just use the training data itself or augmented versions.
That's a common practical choice, yes.
Yeah.
Or, as mentioned, unlabeled data if you have it.
Right. Okay. That clarifies the mechanics quite a bit. Let's swing back to the experiments then, the ode detection.
Sure. They used standard image data sets for this, like fashion MNIST as in distribution, and then CAMNIST, not MNIST, as out of distribution.
Standard setup and metrics.
Things like AROC, AUPR, the usual suspects for evaluating how well you can distinguish in distribution from out of distribution based on the uncertainty score.
And how did CSD stack up?
It did very well.
Yeah.
CSD, especially versions using data augmentation, CSD aug, or ODE data as context, CSD ODE, was often competitive with, and sometimes better than, methods like MC dropout, Bayesian neural nets, RND, and even deep ensembles.
And crucially, CSD is just a single model at test time.
That's the key advantage. Comparable performance, fraction of the compute. They also noted how adding augmentations or target domain context consistently boosted CSD's performance.
Makes sense. What about the reinforcement learning part, VisDoom?
Yeah, this was cool. They use VisDoom, a 3D environment, focusing on tasks with sparse rewards, where the agent only gets feedback very occasionally, like when it finally reaches a goal.
Which makes exploration really hard.
Exactly. If you don't explore effectively, you might never stumble upon the reward. They integrated CSD into a rainbow DQN agent.
How? As an intrinsic reward.
Precisely. The CSD uncertainty estimate was used to generate an intrinsic reward signal. Basically, the agent got rewarded for visiting states where the CSD model was uncertain.
Encouraging it to explore the unknown.
Right. And they compared this CSD-based exploration to standard DQN, RND, another popular exploration method, Bayesian DQN, and IDS.
And the outcome?
CSD was able to solve all the tested environments, even the hardest one with the sparsest reward. It showed it could drive exploration effectively enough to find the goal where some other methods failed.
That really demonstrates the practical value in a challenging domain.
Definitely suggests it's a powerful tool for exploration.
So, just to place this in context historically, we had deep ensembles emerging as a strong practical baseline.
Yep, Lakshmanarayan et al., 2017, a key paper there.
And then the theoretical work on NTKs, Jacket et al., 2018, explaining wide network behavior.
Right, CSD kind of sits at the intersection using the NTK theory to build a practical, efficient alternative to ensembles.
So the novelty is really that single model approximation of ensemble uncertainty.
That, and the specific way they derive it using the NTK regression framework. Plus, the mechanism for incorporating unlabeled data or augmentations contextually is also quite novel.
What about the real-world implications? Where could this make a difference?
Well, the obvious one is resource-constrained environments. Think edge devices, real-time systems where running 5 models is just not feasible. CSD offers a path to uncertainty quantification there.
Safety critical applications too, right? Medical diagnosis, autonomous driving. Knowing the model's confidence is paramount.
Absolutely. If the CSD score is high uncertainty, maybe you need human oversight or a different action.
And the RL implications we touched on, potentially faster, better learning in complex robotics or game AI tasks because of improved exploration.
Could really accelerate progress in areas currently bottlenecked by sparse rewards.
And better ode detection means more robust models in deployment, less likely to fail silently when encountering unexpected inputs.
Yeah. Improving reliability against the unexpected is a huge ongoing challenge.
Okay, this brings us nicely to our novel notions segment. Time to speculate a bit based on this paper.
That was a brainstorm. What's your first idea?
Idea 1, contextualized meta-learning for uncertainty.
Ooh, meta-learning. Okay, unpack that.
So, you know how meta-learning trains models to adapt quickly to new tasks?
Right, learning to learn.
What if we define a task as predicting the CSD uncertainty for just a single data point, or maybe a small batch? The meta-learner wouldn't just predict the output, but also learn to predict the CSD uncertainty for that specific input.
So it learns patterns across data points related to their inherent uncertainty. Like it learns inputs that look like this tend to have high CSD uncertainty.
Exactly. It combines meta-learning's cross-task generalization with CSD's efficient point-wise uncertainty estimate.
Okay, obvious benefit. Maybe you could get a quick uncertainty read on new data without the full CSD context calculation every time.
That's one angle. But here's maybe a less obvious one. Dynamic resource allocation.
Go on.
If the meta-learner flags an input as likely having high CSD uncertainty before you even run the main task prediction,
you could write it differently.
right, you could trigger a more expensive, perhaps more robust backup model or flag it for human review immediately. Think fraud detection, medical imaging.
That's really neat. An adaptive system that knows when it needs to be more careful based on meta-learned uncertainty patterns could make systems more efficient and safer.
Connects to work like MML, but focused on this uncertainty prediction task.
Very cool. What's idea number 2?
Uncertainty-driven data augmentation policy learning.
Okay, data augmentation meets RL.
The
Interesting.
CSD benefits from data augmentation, right? Especially using augmented data as context.
We saw that in the results.
But usually we just pick some standard augmentations, rotations, flips, whatever. What if we learned the best augmentation policy?
Learn how.
Using reinforcement learning. Train an RL agent whose actions are applying different data augmentations.
And the reward.
The reward would be based on how much the chosen augmentations reduce the CSD uncertainty when evaluated on some unlabeled target domain data.
Whoa. Okay, so the agent literally gets rewarded for finding augmentations that make the CSD model more confident, lower uncertainty about the kind of data it's going to see in the real world.
Precisely. It's learning to generate the most helpful context data via augmentation.
Obvious thesis. This could lead to much better uncertainty estimates on the target domain, improving O detection or RL exploration even further than fixed augmentations, like auto-augment, but driven by uncertainty reduction.
Exactly. But the non-obvious bit.
Let me guess. The learned policy itself tells you something.
Right. The kinds of augmentations the RL agent discovers are optimal might reveal the specific types of variations the underlying model is most confused by.
So it's diagnostic. If it learns that, say, slight color shifts drastically increase uncertainty, maybe you need to make your core model more robust to color shifts or gather more data with that variation.
Exactly. It could guide model development or data collection, and maybe these learned policies are even transferable to related tasks.
That's a fascinating feedback loop. Using uncertainty to learn augmentations, which then inform how to build better, less uncertain models in the first place.
Could really streamline making robust AI, especially when labeled data is scarce.
Lots of potential there.
Of course, just want to remind everyone, these novel notions are speculative, just food for thought.
Absolutely. Fun to think about where this could lead, though.
So, wrapping up then, the key takeaway from the paper.
CSD, Contextual Similarity Distillation, offers a really promising, computationally efficient way to get uncertainty estimates from deep learning models.
By cleverly using the neural tangent kernel framework and reframing the problem, they managed to approximate ensemble uncertainty with just a single model.
Which is a big deal compared to running, 5 or 10 models.
And the results, both in ode detection and RL exploration, look strong.
Yeah, they really show the practical potential.
We definitely encourage you, if this sparked your interest, to dig into the original paper. The math, the full experimental details, it's all in there.
Link will be in the description, as usual.
It definitely feels like a significant step towards building more reliable AI systems that not only perform well, but also critically know when they don't know.
Yeah, lots of exciting directions open up by this work.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We'll be back soon exploring more cutting-edge research. Stay curious.